My boss said I was weak for taking paternity leave, so I left the company. Started my own firm and took all his clients with me. I'm a 31-year-old new dad. And I used to be the kind of employee every boss dreams of. The type who stayed late without being asked, skipped lunch breaks, and checked emails before even brushing his teeth. I thought hard work could buy me respect, maybe even stability. I worked for a man named Mr. Reynolds, a legend in the industry. People said he built his company from the ground up, but if you looked close enough, it was really built on the backs of people like me. Reynolds wasn't evil in an obvious way. He was the kind of boss who called you a rock star one day and replaceable the next. He wore charm like armor, smooth, confident, and terrifyingly persuasive. He preached hustle culture like it was gospel. Winners don't need sleep, he used to say, laughing at his own brilliance. I'd nod and push through another 14-hour day, convincing myself this was what success looked like. My wife Leah used to beg me to slow down. You're working yourself into an early grave, she'd say, rubbing my shoulders when I came home past midnight. I'd smile weakly and tell her just a few more months, babe. Once Reynolds promotes me, it'll all be worth it. I believed that, I really did. The funny part? I wasn't miserable back then. I actually liked the grind. The long nights made me feel important, useful, like I was building something bigger than myself. But deep down, I think I was just chasing approval. His approval. The kind that never really comes, no matter how much you give. I didn't know it yet, but my blind loyalty was setting me up for a lesson I'd never forget. One that would destroy the image I'd built of myself, and of the man I thought was my mentor. When Leah told me she was pregnant, I swear the world stopped spinning for a second. We'd been trying for years, praying every month for good news, and now it was finally happening. I remember holding that little test in my hands, my throat tightening as I whispered, "We're really doing this." She laughed and cried at the same time, and for the first time in years, I felt something pure, a joy not tied to performance metrics or client deadlines. Just life. The next morning at work, I walked into Reynolds' office grinning like a fool. "Sir," I just wanted to share some good news. Leah's pregnant." He looked up from his laptop, expression flat. For a second, I thought he didn't hear me. Then he smirked. "Congratulations, Anderson. Just don't let fatherhood make you soft." I laughed awkwardly, waiting for him to crack a smile. He didn't. He just went back to typing. My laughter died in my throat. The weeks that followed felt different. Every time I mentioned a doctor's appointment or talked about baby plans, I caught that same smirk, like I was becoming a liability. "You've got a family coming," he'd say. "Make sure they don't distract you from real priorities." Real priorities. As if the tiny heartbeat in that ultrasound didn't count. Leah noticed the shift in me. "He said that again, didn't he?" she asked one night as I sat in bed checking emails. I nodded. "It's fine. He's just old school." But even as I said it, I could feel the first cracks forming in my loyalty. I told myself it was nothing, that once I proved I could balance both worlds, he'd respect me even more. I didn't realize then that this was the beginning of a test. I was never meant to pass as Leah's due date got closer. I finally worked up the courage to request my paternity leave to short weeks. Unpaid, just enough to help her recover and adjust to life with the baby. I'd been there 5 years. Never missed a project deadline, never called in sick, never even used all my vacation days. I thought I'd earned it. When I told Reynolds, he leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. 2 weeks? He repeated slowly, like I'd just told him I wanted a sabbatical in the Maldives. "You sure that's necessary?" I hesitated. "It's not about necessary. It's about being there for my family." He nodded, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Of course, family's important. But remember, business doesn't stop for bottles and diapers." The words hit me like a slap I couldn't react to. Still, I kept my tone calm. "I'll make sure everything's covered before I go." "Good," he said, "because I'll be watching how things hold up without you." And just like that, everything changed. My workload doubled overnight. Projects I'd already handed off were suddenly reassigned back to me. Meetings piled up late into the evening, and every missed call was treated like a cardinal sin. One night, I sat at my desk long after everyone left, my eyes burning from the screen. I caught my reflection in the black monitor, hollow, tired, desperate to prove I could do it all. When I got home, Leah was asleep on the couch, a half-eaten sandwich on her lap, and her phone open to baby name lists. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Just a few more weeks." But deep down, I felt something shifting. I wasn't just working for my family anymore. I was fighting to survive in a place that saw compassion as weakness. I didn't know it yet. But Reynolds was already planning to make an example out of me. The morning Leah went into labor, everything else in my life just... It was 4:17 a.m. when she shook me awake, her voice trembling. "It's time." My heart raced as I scrambled for the hospital bag, my mind caught between excitement and terror. We drove through the empty streets, her hand gripping mine so tight it hurt. The world outside was dark and quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath before something life-changing. At the hospital, everything blurred into bright lights, beeping monitors, and the sound of nurses moving with calm urgency. When our daughter's first cry filled the room, I swear I forgot how to breathe. Leah sobbed, clutching our baby to her chest, whispering, "We did it." It was perfect until my phone started vibrating in my pocket. I ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I glanced at the screen. Reynolds. I stepped into the hallway and answered. "Sir, His voice was cold. "Anderson, where are you?" "The client call started 20 minutes ago." I blinked, stunned. "My wife's in labor, Mr. Reynolds. I told you yesterday he'd cut me off." "You've told me a lot of things, but I didn't think you'd actually abandon a deal this big. You're the team lead, act like it." Felt my throat tighten. "With all due respect, I'm not abandoning anything. My daughter was just born." Then that same condescending chuckle I'd heard 100 times. "Congratulations. But don't expect sympathy when your performance review reflects this." I just stood there numb. Phone still pressed to my ear. Hours later, when Leah fell asleep holding our baby, I checked my email out of habit. There it was, a formal notice from HR. Subject, demotion notice, adjustment of role responsibilities. My hand shook as I read it. Effective immediately. No explanation. No discussion. In one night. I became a father and a corporate ghost. When I returned to work 3 weeks later, everything felt colder. My nameplate had been moved from my glass-walled office to a cubicle by the printer. My projects? Reassigned. My login access? Temporarily restricted. No announcement, no conversation, just quiet humiliation disguised as corporate restructuring. I walked past my old office that first morning. Through the glass, I saw a younger guy, Daniel, sitting in my chair, presenting my proposal deck to a client. The same deck I'd spent months perfecting before I left. Reynolds stood beside him, smiling proudly, one hand on Daniel's shoulder like a mentor. When his eyes met mine through the glass, he didn't look away. He smirked. Later that day, I found him in the hallway. "Sir, I'd like to understand what's happening," I said, my voice calm but shaking. He shrugged. "You left during a crucial phase. We had to adapt." Daniel stepped up. "I was on approved leave," I reminded him. He smiled thinly. "And look where that got you." I wanted to shout, to call him out for what he was doing, but I knew it was useless. He wanted a reaction, something to prove I wasn't professional enough. So instead, I swallowed it. Every insult, every stolen opportunity at home, I told Leah bits and pieces. "They've changed a few things," I said, downplaying the truth. She could see through it, though. "You look like a man being punished for caring," she whispered one night as she fed our baby. I turned away before she saw my eyes. The whispers at work got louder. "Reynolds says Anderson couldn't handle the pressure. He's lucky to still have a job." Each word chipped away at me until even I started to believe it. But then, one afternoon, a coworker slipped a folder onto my desk and murmured, "You didn't hear this from me?" Inside were emails, proof that Reynolds had transferred all my clients to Daniel weeks before my leave even started. And just like that, I realized this wasn't retaliation. It was a setup. That night, I sat alone in the parking lot after everyone else had gone home. Gripping that folder so hard, my knuckles turned white. The fluorescent lights above flickered, humming like some cruel soundtrack to my unraveling. My reflection in the car window didn't even look like me anymore, just a tired man who'd traded self-respect for a paycheck. The next few weeks were torture. Reynolds turned every meeting into a stage. "Anderson," he'd bark, "why can't you deliver results like Daniel?" Every jab landed like a knife. My team stopped copying me on emails. Clients I'd built relationships with for years stopped replying altogether. He was erasing me piece by piece, and everyone was watching it happen. The worst part was how normal he made it look. He'd wrap his cruelty in constructive feedback, smirking when others laughed. "This is what happens when you put family before business," he said once, in front of the entire department. Laughter filled the room. My throat burned, but I stayed silent. At home, Leah tried to hold me together. "You don't deserve this," she whispered, as I stared blankly at the wall, our daughter sleeping in her arms. But I barely heard her. I was too deep in the noise, the humiliation, the anger, the helplessness. Then came the day everything inside me finally broke. Reynolds called a team meeting. "We'll use this as a teaching moment," he said, pointing to a chart on the screen. My chart. "This is what happens when your priorities slip." My name. My work. My humiliation. Something inside me went quiet. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out of the conference room. No outburst. No words. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing down the hallway. For the first time in my career, I didn't care if I got fired. I just knew I couldn't let this man define my worth anymore. The next morning, I walked into the office with an unusual calm, the kind that comes when you've already accepted the fallout. The sun poured through the tall windows, catching the dust in the air, and for once, I didn't feel trapped by it. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, typed out the simplest email of my life. Effective immediately, I'm resigning from my position. Thank you for the lessons. I'll take them with me. No drama. No explanations. Just closure. I clicked send, shut the laptop, and leaned back. It felt light. A few minutes later, Reynolds stormed out of his office. "Anderson, this some kind of joke?" he barked. His voice carried across the floor, and every head turned. "No joke," I said, standing. "I'm done." He laughed, but there was tension in it. "You think walking out makes you a hero? You'll come crawling back. Guys like you always do." I met his eyes and said quietly, "No, I'll build something better." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. People stopped typing. Even Daniel looked uncomfortable. Reynolds just shook his head, muttering, "Ungrateful." As I walked past him, I took one last look at that office. The gray walls, the framed motivational posters, the lifeless fluorescent lights. It was everything I used to mistake for purpose. Leah was waiting outside in the car with our daughter. When I got in, she looked nervous. "Did you really do it?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, exhaling. "I quit." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "So what now?" I looked out the window at the skyline, my reflection blending with the city. "Now," I said, "I start over. But this time, I work for us." I didn't know how or when, but for the first time in years, I felt free. The first few weeks after quitting felt like standing on a cliff, terrifying and freeing all at once. I'd wake up early out of habit, reach for my phone to check work emails, only to remember there were none. No deadlines. No meetings. Just silence and the sound of my daughter babbling in the next room. Leah would tease me about pacing around the apartment. "You look like a caged animal," she laughed one morning as I scrolled through my old contacts. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't built to sit still. Somewhere between exhaustion and determination. An idea began to form. A consulting firm built on everything Reynolds' company wasn't. Fair contracts. honest communication, actual respect. One night, I told Leah, "I think I can do it," I said. "Start something real, something I'd be proud to tell our daughter about one day." She smiled, exhausted, but supportive. "Then let's do it. We'll figure it out together." So, from our tiny living room surrounded by baby toys and coffee mugs, I registered my business Anderson & Co. Solutions. I built the website myself, crafted proposals during nap times, and cold-called old contacts who still remembered the work I'd done, not the title I'd lost at first. The responses were polite but dismissive. "We're happy with our current provider," they'd say, meaning Reynolds. But one afternoon, I got a call from a client I hadn't heard from in months. "He's arrogant now," the man said. "Doesn't listen. You're the one who always got things done. Let's talk." It was one client. Just one. But as I hung up, my heart pounded like it used to when life felt full of possibilities. That was the moment. I realized I wasn't running from Reynolds anymore. I was running toward something new, and this time I planned to win. That first client was the spark I needed. Once we started working together, word spread faster than I expected. Within weeks, 2 more companies reached out, small contracts at first, but consistent. I poured everything into them: late nights, detailed follow-ups, handwritten thank you notes. It wasn't about money. It was about rebuilding my name. Leah would sit across from me at the kitchen table, our baby asleep in the bassinet beside us. "You're smiling again," she said one night, watching me type. I hadn't realized it, but she was right. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking up angry. I was hungry. Then came the first real sign of poetic justice. A former coworker, Priya, called me from a private number. "You didn't hear it from me," she whispered, "but Reynolds is losing it. Half his clients are complaining. He's blaming everyone but himself." I laughed, not out of pettiness, but relief. It felt like the universe was finally balancing the scales. Still, I didn't gloat. I kept my focus. I built systems, hired freelancers, learned to lead with kindness, everything Reynolds never did. Every invoice I sent, every happy client, was another quiet victory. But I also started collecting things: emails, old contracts, evidence of the unethical practices I'd witnessed back at his firm. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but something told me to keep them safe. A few months later, a major client called out of the blue. "We've decided to end our partnership with Reynolds," the rep said. "We'd like to work with you instead." I froze. This was the same client Reynolds had once bragged about locking in for life. Leah walked in just as I hung up. "Good news?" she asked. I grinned for the first time in forever. "Better," I said. "It's the beginning of the end." By the end of that year, my small firm had become something real, not flashy, but solid. Clients came through referrals, one after another. Every new project meant another brick laid in the foundation of the life I'd promised Leah and our daughter. I wasn't chasing survival anymore. I was chasing legacy then. One chilly morning, I got an email that stopped me cold. Subject: acquisition opportunity, Reynolds Consulting. For a second, I thought it was spam. But the details were legit. Reynolds' company was on the verge of collapse after losing multiple key clients, investors pulling out, and several HR complaints piling up. My old workplace, the empire he'd built on fear, was falling apart. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, half joking. "Should we buy it?" I wrote. He called me 10 minutes later. "Actually, we could." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings and negotiations. With the financial backing of 2 major clients who trusted my leadership, we made an offer: quiet, strategic, and airtight. The paperwork was signed faster than I expected. And just like that, the man who once called me weak unknowingly handed over his kingdom to the person he tried to destroy. When the acquisition finalized, I walked through those same glass doors I'd once left behind. Everything looked smaller now. Reynolds was there, pacing, confusion written all over his face as he read the news on his phone. He looked up at me, disbelief turning to rage. "You," he hissed. I smiled calmly. Business doesn't stop for bottles and diapers, right? For once, he had no comeback. Standing in that office, I realized revenge wasn't about shouting or breaking things. It was about walking back into the place they buried you and owning the ground above it. Reynolds called for a private meeting the next morning. I agreed, partly out of curiosity, partly because I wanted to see what a fallen tyrant looked like up close. When I entered his office, he was already seated behind the same mahogany desk where he'd once humiliated me. But this time, his confidence was gone. The man who used to dominate a room now looked smaller, his posture stiff, his smile forced. So he began, forcing a chuckle. "You must feel pretty proud of yourself." "I taught you well." I stayed quiet, letting him fill the silence. It made him uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "Look, I'll admit, things got tense between us. But business is business. You were emotional. I was harsh. Maybe we can work something out. I could even stay on as a consultant. For continuity," almost laughed, "continuity that was rich coming from a man who tossed me aside like a broken tool." I leaned forward. "You told me once that business doesn't stop for bottles and diapers." He blinked. "What are you getting at?" "I'm saying you were right. Business doesn't stop. It just outgrows the people who poison it." His face flushed red. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said, standing. "I just learned from the best example of what not to become." For a moment, he just stared at me, breathing heavy, realizing this wasn't a negotiation, it was the end. I slid an envelope across the desk. "That's your severance. Effective immediately." He froze. "You're firing me?" "Correct," I said calmly. "Consider it constructive feedback." I walked out as his voice cracked behind me, shouting something about betrayal, but for once, the roles were reversed and his noise didn't matter anymore. Outside, the air felt lighter. I called Leah and said simply, "It's done." She paused. "How does it feel?" "Like I finally got my life back." It's been 2 years since that day, and sometimes I still catch myself thinking about how different my life is now. My office isn't the biggest, but it's filled with laughter, not fear. My employees don't dread Mondays. They bring their ideas, their stories, their humanity. I lead differently because I remember what it felt like to be broken by someone who thought power was control. Most mornings, I arrive early, coffee in hand, and take a moment to just look around. The framed photo of Leah and our daughter sits on my desk. She's older now, full of questions and mischief. Sometimes she asks, "Daddy, what do you do at work?" And I tell her, I help people build things they're proud of. She doesn't understand it yet, but one day she will. There are moments when I still see Reynolds' ghost in my memories, the smirk, the arrogance, the way he made me feel small. But those images don't carry pain anymore. They're reminders. Proof that rock bottom wasn't the end, it was the beginning. One afternoon, while cleaning out some old files, I found my original resignation email. I read it again. "Thank you for the lessons. I'll take them with me." I smiled because I finally understood what I meant. He taught me everything I never wanted to become before I left the office that night. I looked out the window at the city lights flickering below. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing success. I was living it on my own terms, and as I turned off the lights, I whispered the truth that had carried me through every sleepless night. I took one day off to care for my child, and that day changed everything. Because the man who fired me taught me how to build something better.